Thank you all and good afternoon. Happy to see so many familiar faces at the public debriefing of our third plenary of 2022. We will have a very full program, which I will not list in entirety, just to give you as a kickoff. I think our P3, we were able to welcome Lilia Malon, Commissioner from the Ukrainian regulator. Unfortunately, she was only able to attend the meeting in virtual format, and then only up until the moment that the sirens rang out and she had to go into hiding. I think that kind of reminds us of the fact that these colleagues are still very much at war. But we were happy to welcome NCC as a participant without voting rights for our very first meeting. And she also emailed us that she was happy to attend and sorry that it had to be so short-lived. We have a lot of stakeholders in the room with us today, so very welcome to you. We also have a number of people online. We have received questions online, which we will hopefully have time enough to take up at the various agenda items that we have. And also, if you are online and you have a question, please use the chat and they will be transferred to me and read out at the question and answers time. I think you all have experience with our format. We will have a couple of presentations on various issues on the agenda, followed by a broader Q&A session. So for our first part, we will first have Kostas, our incoming chair, who will present the work program 2023, which was approved for public consultation. We will have our chairs of the Open Internet Working Group presenting various reports and our co-chairs of the End User Working Group. So these are in our first part. And after these three presentations, we will open the floor for questions and answers. So Kostas, you are with us from Athens, I hope. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Annemarie. Good afternoon to all. So I'm happy to present you today the outcome of our work so far with regards to the preparation of Work Program 2023. You may remember that we started early in 2022 with exchanging ideas on the work program in March and in April, when we launched the call for input. And on the basis of this initial input from our stakeholders, as well as discussions within BEREC, we have prepared the draft work program 2023, which is already published for public consultation since last Friday, following the approval of BOR in plenary 3. Next slide, please. Now, BEREC Work Program 2023 works on the priorities that the Board of Regulators have identified for 2023. And these areas may be, of course, complemented by other emerging topics of interest during the year if we identify these kind of conditions. The objectives of the work program are based, of course, on BEREC Strategy 21-25, with a close focus on the three key priorities we have defined, that is promoting full connectivity, supporting sustainable and open digital markets, and empowering end users. The draft work program contains 17 mandatory items, those coming from the regulatory framework, for example, reporting obligations stemming from the roaming regulation. Work program also includes 9 customary projects, which are projects that we repeat periodically, as we consider this very helpful for our members and our stakeholders. For example, the regulatory accounting in practice report. Work program 2023 includes also 9 carryover items, 9 carryover projects, launched in 2022 and planned to be completed in 2023. And finally, Work Program 2023 includes 13 new projects covering different topics, which I will discuss in the next slide. So next slide, please. So the new work items for 2023 are those included as a reaction to the trends we see in our field, in the electronics communications ecosystem and market. And based on the input we received from the stakeholders during the initial call for input, as well as on discussions we had internally within the Board of Regulators and with our experts, we identified that the following 13 projects deserve more attention from BEREC next year, 2023. So we propose to include in our work program a study about the evolution of the competition dynamics of tower and access infrastructure companies, like fiber companies, a workshop on the migration to very high capacity networks and copper switch off, with a focus on the needs of the end users. This is in direct response and directly related to the very ambitious objectives set by European Digital Agenda for 2030. A report on the entry of large content and application providers into the markets of electronic communication networks and electronic communication services. So this increasing presence of content and application providers in our relevant markets needs more work, more attention. A report on the authorization and related framework for international connectivity infrastructures. Submarine cables are very important infrastructure, and we want to explore the regulatory implications in this direction. Work Program 2023 will include, of course, a reflection of NRA's independence features. Will put emphasis on machine-to-machine communication, so a report on machine-to-machine communications and permanent roaming is proposed to be included in Work Program 2023. The phasing out of 2G and 3G networks will be covered by Work Program 2023 through a report foreseen. We also foresee a workshop on connectivity from low Earth orbit satellites. We see this trend. We saw this trend the last year, and we believe it's something we need to explore further, offering another dimension, another option for connectivity. Next year's work program will include a report about cloud services and edge computing, a workshop on the perspectives and regulatory competition challenges of Internet of Things, a study on the trends and policy regulatory challenges of telecommunications, cloudification, virtualization, and softwareization, another key trend we see in electronic communications. And also ad hoc work on ICT sustainability is foreseen. Sustainability remains a key point of interest for BEREC. And finally, work on empowering end users through environmental transparency on digital products and services is foreseen for 2023. Next slide, please. So, coming now to the next steps. What's the next step? What are the next steps regarding the preparation of Work Program 2023? As I said, the public consultation started last Friday and will be open for a month. So please submit your feedback, your views by the 7th of November. BEREC, after taking into account these submissions, will adopt the final work program for 2023 during the last plenary meeting of the year in December. And so please consult BEREC's website for more details about the submission process. And we're really looking forward in receiving your input. This is all from me, I think, with regards to Work Program 2023, and I will be glad to take any questions you might have during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kostas. Good afternoon. Together with my fellow co-chair colleague Klaus, we present you today the activities of the Open Internet Working Group. Next slide, please. We have 3 topics on the agenda today. 1, the publication of the BEREC report on the implementation of the Open Internet Regulation. 2, information on NRA coordination related to discontinuing zero-rating offers. 3, publication of the BEREC preliminary assessment on the underlying assumptions of payments from large content and application providers to Internet service providers. Next slide, please. We now have a look at the annual BEREC implementation report. As you may have seen, we have a shorter title now, that is to make it more readable. Next slide, please. It is the 6th year of the application of the Open Internet Regulation, and the report of this year is divided into 2 parts. 1 is the main body, 2 is the annex. In the main body, we provide a summary of the NRA's activities on monitoring and ensuring compliance that were carried out during the reporting period, as you can see on the slide. Additionally, we have also dedicated chapters on topical issues that occurred during the same reporting period. In particular, the rulings of the European Court of Justice and related NRA actions. Also, the EU sanctions to block Russian media outlets, and the COVID-19 special reporting mechanism that ended in November 2021. In the annex, we have a collection of relevant national rules, regulations, and specifications in force. We also provide information on quality monitoring tools provided by NRAs, as well as information on court proceedings related to the Open Internet Regulation. To prepare this report, we have collected data from 28 NRAs via an internal questionnaire. Next slide, please. According to most NRAs, monitoring has become a recurring and ongoing activity, and also the interaction with ISPs evolves year after year. It can also be observed that NRAs applied multiple methods when performing their monitoring activities. These monitoring activities revealed that in 20 member states, zero-rating offers were provided still by end of April this year. We can observe that this number has decreased when compared to the previous reporting period. That is mainly due to the rulings published by the ECJ. We also noted that a few NRAs found that ISP's contractual documents lack clear and understandable information, so there we see still some room for improvement. Furthermore, member states continue to provide additional guidance where seen useful and also to introduce additional requirements. For instance, 6 NRAs have introduced additional remedies for end-user complaints. We also noted that NRAs are rather active in the field of Internet access service quality measurement tools. 19 NRAs provide such a tool, and they keep it up to date, so to reflect on the technological evolution. There are also some NRAs, they have plans to implement such a tool in the future. We also observed that 4 NRAs made updates on applicable penalties in cases of infringements based on national legislation. And as already mentioned last year, all the NRAs and member states now have the means to impose penalties in cases of infringement. To summarize, the report shows that the NRAs have actively implemented the Open Internet Regulation, but there is still room for improvement, especially in terms of setting the speed definitions in the contracts by the ISPs. Next slide, please. We now provide some information on NRA coordination related to discontinuing zero-rating offers. Next slide, please. NRAs are continuously monitoring the developments in the markets since the publication of the rulings by the European Court of Justice in September last year, and also the publication of the updated Open Internet guidelines this year. To share information and also to enable consistent application of the Open Internet regulation, BEREC has a forum for NRAs. And what we learned from these exchanges and what we can also observe since the publication of the guidelines is that in some member states there is no more zero rating. In other member states, marketing and selling of new zero rating subscriptions has already ended, while migration to new contracts is still ongoing. Some other member states indicated that discussions are still ongoing and the decision on the timelines is still pending, so we would expect further developments in the coming months. And I'm now happy to pass the floor to my colleague Klaus.
Okay, many thanks, Veronica, and good afternoon also from my behalf. Next slide, please. As presented during the last debriefing, BEREC approved a new ad hoc work stream, and I'm happy to tell that we have progressed the work rather well. We have received a large number of written contributions and seen a lot of opinions published by different stakeholders. I think we have actually analyzed around 40 to 50 different papers in this regard. We have also organized 5 workshops with their outstanding industry experts, and also based on this and the earlier BEREC work, I think this has really given us a good basis to do this analysis. Now, we have published our first contribution to the discussion, namely BEREC preliminary assessment of the underlying assumptions of payments from large caps to ISPs. We are following the discussion and of course progressing the work also further. And on this slide you can see some further information about the next steps we are intending. Next slide, please. So let's move to the content, and I would like to start with the scope. This paper presents our preliminary assessment in relation to the direct compensation discussion, and we are really trying to conduct this assessment in a holistic manner. The scope of this paper is clearly limited to basically whether the telco claims are substantiated, and large caps should be obligated to pay ISPs for delivering traffic to their users. In this paper, we do not study whether the big tech or large caps should be regulated in general. And we are actually trying to do this analysis based on the facts available. As I mentioned, we've been studying a large number of different contributions. We've been seeing the data available from OECD, Cisco, the public sources. And we are really trying to also avoid speculation at this paper. So basically doing a proper analysis based on the data available. And of course, we have to say that we have heard a lot of talks and also the different opinions about the different approaches and also further and broader, let's say, scope. And at this point, we just have to say that this paper was based on the data available. And of course, we are very happy to actually have a further contributions for the European institutions and also to have a, let's say, far broader contributions to the discussion in the upcoming, let's say, months. And next slide, please. So I think I would like to start with the notion that this discussion is actually quite old, and we have seen these issues already years ago. I remember quite well then ISPs were implementing deep packet inspection devices to their networks and throttling peer-to-peer traffic 20 years ago. Then we had a proposal from Ethno 10 years ago regarding the sending body network pace. And BEREC also analyzed the proposal that time. So what we are doing now first, we of course have to analyze whether things have really changed. And basically now, as I mentioned, we are basing that on the data available. Well, then when doing the analysis, we note that the internet traffic has grown steadily over the years, and that the current traffic volumes are notably higher than they were 10 years ago when we did our previous analysis. However, if we, for example, take the Cisco forecasts, 10 years ago they forecasted the general data growth for internet traffic in Western Europe to be 36%. And for this year, the prediction was 22%. So we are, of course, seeing that the data growth is continuing. We might see a slight decrease in the growth rate, but I think the conclusion is that we are not seeing any fundamental change in the growth tendency. And if we are taking of course, the evaluation a bit further, we are seeing there are changes in traffic patterns. For example, according to Cisco, we are seeing that they're predicting that 72% of the whole internet traffic go through CDNs. And that's a big change. That's a very big change. And of course, also due to that, we are seeing that the role of big caps is increasing. Then considering all the facts we've seen, we still consider that the internet has proven its ability to self-adapt to the changing conditions, such as the increasing traffic amounts and then the changing demand patterns. And I think we can also take the COVID pandemic as a good example. During that, we have a very sudden increase in the traffic amounts in mobile networks. And what was reported by the operators and then the regulators, we had a nice green map of Europe. So basically, we didn't really detect any major issues due to that traffic increase. So next slide, please. Now, basically, when we were discussing whether the situation has really changed, so the next question is that, are the earlier findings still valid? In 2012, BEREC analyzed the sending body network-based proposal and concluded that it would provide ISPs the ability to exploit their termination monopoly, and it might be of significant harm to internet ecosystem and to quality of service. Now, based on this preliminary assessment, we are of the opinion that the underlying assumptions hasn't really changed. And we would still consider the earlier conclusions valid. We also note that this kind of the model would require regulatory oversight and could require regulatory intervention, and that an adequate justification is needed for any measure intervening the market. Next slide, please. Okay, then we continue to the topics of traffic causation and dependencies. We consider that in the internet, traffic is requested and thus caused by the ISP's customers. And we note that many of the access networks are actually built to receive more traffic than they send. And the same phenomenon is also visible from the ISP subscriptions, even though the technology itself might provide a possibility to sell symmetric subscriptions. The operators quite often sell asymmetric speeds. And as noting this, we also consider that, of course, also the content players, that the caps have also their own possibilities to impact the efficiency of transmission, and also having the levers really to impact the situation. We know that many of them are using CDNs. That has certain implications. Then you have a possibility to use more efficient encoding techniques, or the optimizing the data flows with the screen size or the network capacity. So it's basically not just the ISPs, but also, of course, the CAPs have a certain role on this. And next, we are actually observing that both needs each other. I think it's very hard to sell high-speed connections if you don't have a content that would require that kind of enhanced quality. But also that the good internet access service quality really facilitates the possibility to provide services and content. And it's also very essential. Of course, today we might say that the speed is less of the problem that it used to be, because we are having now the fiber networks and 5G networks that provide very, very high capabilities. Next slide, please. Okay, one of the questions in the discussion has been about the costs. What cost the content is actually causing. And the discussion was really about what costs are traffic sensitive. I think it's fair to say that this answer depends heavily on the assumptions used. We know that in the frontal economic study, they had a certain assumptions. And in this paper, BEREC has defined our assumptions. So basically in this paper, we consider that building a capacity base stations to increase capacity in certain area, that's definitely traffic sensitive. Also, then you need to upgrade the core network or aggregation network switches or routers to increase the link capacity. That's traffic sensitive. But then an operator decides to build a new 5G network or fiber network, or basically deploy that network to a new area. We consider that that's more a business decision based on the operator strategies. It's basically offering the possibility to keep on the competition to provide enhanced services. And I would say that it's very hard to say that somebody would be replacing an ADSL network because it's used. No, it's the other reasons why for example, the copper networks are replaced by the newer generations. And based on these assumptions, we concluded that, and had these findings, that the fixed networks have very low traffic sensitivity. We know that the fiber networks, for example, they have a nearly unlimited capacity in that sense. Then mobile access network, they have some degree of traffic sensitivity. And we note that the IP interconnection disagreements were typically about the increasing the IP interconnection link capacity. But the cost for doing that is quite irrelevant in this discussion. And basically, based on this, we find that the cost for network upgrades that are necessary to handle the increased IP traffic volumes is low compared to the total network cost that mainly coming from actually building the access networks. Of course, we know that there's definitely quite a big cost to deploy for example, the fiber networks and 5G networks, and it's not really questioned. But I think it's now whether you can contribute that to the increased traffic loads, or whether that's let's say, bit independent discussion. Next slide, please. And to our last slide, there was also some arguments regarding whether the CAPs are free-riding ISPs infrastructures. We've been looking the sources we found and basically find out these kind of the conclusions. So basically, we can say that we haven't found evidence that CAPs would be free-riding. And we have a couple of points under this claim. So basically, first, we note that the costs for internet connectivity is typically covered by the ISP's customers, and that under the competitive conditions, there's typically no room for free riding. And then we are talking about the scope of this proposal. I mean, we are not just talking about a couple of billions, but really big amount of money. And if there would be such a significant free riding in the market, we would really believe that this would be reflected in the financial statements and loss warnings, and we haven't seen those. And in the end, I would just like to conclude that it's actually also essential to consider the investment from different stakeholders to the whole internet ecosystem. So basically, that concludes our presentation, and I would like to hand over to Paulo and Iris.
Thank you, Klaus. I will be presenting the report on comparison, comparison tools and accreditation. Next slide, please. Next slide. So this report on comparison tools and accreditation wants to shed some light on comparison tools that enable end user to compare and evaluate different kinds of internet access services and different number-based intercommunication service, and where applicable, also number-independent intercommunication services, as set out by Article 103, which is the main legal basis for regulatory authorities to ensure that end users have access free of charge to at least one independent comparison tool. The report also talks about accreditation systems that may be available to providers of independent comparison tools that closely follow the requirements set out in Article 103 of the European Electronic Communication Code. Next slide, please. In order to draft this report, we got information by issuing a questionnaire, which was circulated at the beginning of June of this year throughout 36 countries. We got 28 responses, which provided us with the core information for the report. The report is made by 4 sections and will be submitted for public consultation for 6 weeks until the 23rd of November 2022. Next slide, please. In this report, which is the first BEREC report on this issue, being the provision of Article 103 new to the code, you will find the main information on comparison tool, which I will try to summarize in the next couple of slides. First of all, comparison tools are available in 15 countries, and in 8 of them, the tool is fully compliant with the SEC. Usually, they provide information on both mobile and fixed internet access services and number-based intercommunication services. And they, in many countries, also provide information on bundles of services. In 11 countries, they also consider the speed of discriminate among offers on the basis of the speed of internet access and the technology of internet access. Usually, they provide information at the national level, but in 3 countries, we also can get from these comparison tools information at the subnational level. Next slide, please. And finally, with the certification regime. In most countries, the certification regime is not yet in place. Actually, only in 5 countries it is available. Probably because in many countries, NRAs are focusing on their own independent comparison tools. The certification regime usually requires to cover at least internet access services and number-based interconnection services, and there are no requirements to cover bundles of services. At this stage, independence of the comparison tool is a requirement only in 3 out of the 5 certification regime. And usually independence is considered as financial and operational independence from providers of electronic communication services. In 2 out of them, the certification regime requires the coverage of offers to consumers. In some of them, also other categories of user like micro enterprises or categories of user with particular needs. And we did that's all, and I then pass the floor to Iris.
Thank you, Paulo. So we are presenting the summary report of the workshop on the digital divide held last 8th of June in Cyprus. Next slide, please. This workshop gathered the heads of national regulatory authorities, basically to share views and practices as a follow-up from the study on post-COVID measures to close the digital divide that was developed by ICLABS ESAD for BEREC and published in 2021 October. This study identified 3 main levels of digital divide that set the scene for the workshop regarding the differences in access to digital technologies and the internet, the differences in skills and usage patterns that are affected by age, income, and level of education, and that also affect the differences in what are the outcomes for people from the usage of the internet. This workshop was also following up from the lessons learned during the COVID-19 pandemic in the last 2 years concerning infrastructure resilience and digital inclusion. Next slide, please. The kickoff was a video of interviews with people dealing in different perspectives with the digital divide. Following, there were 3 presentations that were linked to what was shared in this video. ICLABS ESAD explained the 3 levels of digital divide. The European Consumer Association BEUC focused the importance of connectivity and the digital empowerment of citizens. And the representative of DG for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion of the European Commission presented their actions and plans to tackle the digital divide. Closing this part of the presentations were 2 national experiences shared from CTU and AGECOM, the Czech Republic and Italian regulators, on promoting digital inclusion during the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So a roundtable followed with the heads of NRAs that were split into 3 groups in charge of further discussing challenges based on 3 main questions. So question 1 was about how to improve broadband coverage and accelerate network rollouts in the underserved areas. 2, how to secure affordability of telecom services for disadvantaged groups. And 3, how to promote digital skills and motivation for digital excluded people, and also ensure accessibility of digital services. Next slide, please. So as main outcomes from this roundtable, NRAs shared national initiatives and the legal instruments available to member states to accelerate network rollout, like state aid programs or broadband cost reduction solutions, such as access to passive infrastructures and co-sharing. Affordability is seen as a dynamic concept that can change over time and needs to be frequently reviewed, linked to quality and speed of connection and also citizens' needs. The Electronic Communications Code contains provisions that allow for action on affordability of services, including the availability of independent comparison tools for prices and quality of services. This could further include coverage. And finally, the review of national initiatives in promoting digital skills led clear to the conclusion that one size does not fit all, but still some general principles could be drawn from there, like the importance of collaborating with non-usual subjects as NGOs or local governments, schools, churches, in order to reach more people. Also, the relevance of the correct design of digital interactions, since in some cases it's not so much a problem of skills and rather that public forms are making it hard for people to use them. And finally, the right of consumers to be offline or to opt out. And so this was the main outcomes from this discussion. Thank you. And I will pass the floor back to Annemarie for our Q&A.
Thank you, Iris. Thank you very much. With that, we have come to the conclusion of the presentation of 3 different work streams, and I can now open the floor for questions. First, I'd have a look around the room if there are any questions live here. I would like to ask you to present yourself and then ask your question, if maybe even directing a specific expert working group. If you are online and you have a question, please use the chat and it will be transmitted to me. But first on the floor, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. This is Carlos Rodriguez with Telefónica. I have a question, well, a couple of quick questions on process regarding the adoption of the preliminary assessment of the underlying assumption of payments from large caps to ISPs that caught our attention since it leads to the conclusion that BEREC has found no evidence that such mechanism is justified given the current state of the market. So my questions are, has this conclusion and the preliminary assessment been unanimously supported by all BEREC members? And if the answer is no, can you provide visibility on how many national regulatory authorities have supported the conclusions of this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. No, I can tell you that we have decided to publish this report and we do not publish the way we voted. Next question.
Oh, okay. Sorry, too many buttons in there. Thank you. It's Paulo Gracia from ETNO, the ETNO Association. So thanks a lot for the presentation on the report. We take note of the conclusions of the preliminary assessment. We agree with Mr. Nieminen in the assessment that indeed the report is very limited, and the debate by now has gone much beyond the actually what's presented as the ETNO proposal. So it's a much broader debate in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, in other regions, and even the incoming ITU Secretary General announced that this is an issue of the foreign contribution to network investment that is worth discussing at international level. So we are keen, of course, on working on all these different aspects and the multiple considerations that make part of the debate, but we surely are going to look much deeper into the conclusions and look at the premises. I just had a question on the methodology, because indeed you mentioned that this preliminary assessment is mainly based on publicly available data and report, and we have seen 4 different reports referencing the footnotes. And at the same time, the report says that there is some sort of uncertainty that is left on the evolution of cost and of traffic, which doesn't take into account all the elements, for example, the 2030 objectives set out by the EU. So my question is whether in your next steps you think you're going to do a proper market analysis on this evolution of cost to corroborate your assumption, and if you can comment if you think that is some part of uncertainty left, how substantial it is. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks for that question. Of course, I mean, this is first a preliminary assessment, so we have done quite a, let's say, fast work, because the work item was approved just before the summer. And then basically, of course, we are following the development around this. So we note that there's now also new openings, and we are definitely going to follow with let's say, broader also contribution on this topic. And basically the uncertainty itself, I would say that we use the available data at the moment, but of course I would say that for the cost itself, you probably don't really have a very complete data anywhere. So basically that's really we did our assumptions, and of course based on those we think that the assessment is now correct in that regard. But of course, I mean, especially the different, let's say, the changes in the traffic profiles and basically how things are evolving. So they are definitely interesting, and we are still further looking on them.
Thank you. Samuel Stolten at Politico here. Just going back to the question about unanimity on the preliminary assessment, we heard that a couple of NRAs actually requested for the assessment not to be published. Can you confirm or perhaps deny that, please? Thank you.
We had, as we usually do at BEREC plenaries, lively discussions and debates. That's how we roll. And we had lively discussions and debates, and we decided on publishing this paper in the format that you have found it on the internet. And that's all the comment I will have on this point. Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, sorry, you're first and then online.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie Patel with Amazon. Thank you for the presentation on the preliminary assessment. If I remember the meeting debrief that we had 3 months ago, the initial plan was to have 2 reports published this year, one in October, which you've done. But I didn't see in your slides whether there's still a plan to have a report published or a document published in November as well, alongside the work that's happening on the full ICIP report over the course of 2023.
Well, as I presented in this slide, well, we had now a bit more time because, of course, then we did our original planning. We had also, I think, our idea that the Commission would be coming up a bit faster. So we take it that we have now a bit more time and can have also, let's say, a bit more extended look on the topic. So as you mentioned, I mentioned we are now planning the contributions next half next year.
Then maybe 2 questions that we got in the chat. The first is from Michael Nelson from the Carnegie Endowment. What lessons can be learned from the impact from the South Korea's regulations regarding internet interconnection? Klaus?
Thanks for the question. I mean, we already been looking for the South Korean case, and basically, of course, we are studying the matter further. But at this point, I would say that we are not yet ready to share any conclusions from the impacts. So you have to wait for the next deliverables.
Thank you. And the second is back on the issue of the data and the data that you use, and the fact that it is not and there's preliminary assessment. And the question from Barbara Slaba is, what data do you think BEREC is missing?
First, I mean, in this part, we were really trying to assess whether there's certain justifications to change our earlier conclusions, and we are not really sure if we can say that we are missing a certain piece of data. Of course, we are very happy to get your contributions if you think we are missing something, because as I mentioned, we already received a very large number of papers with contributions in opinion paper studies. So basically, we have let's say, already quite an extensive base, but we really plan to continue further the collaboration and also hoping you would contribute to us. So yeah, if you feel that they're missing something, please, well, contact us.
Thank you. Are there more questions on this issue? No, also not on the work program 22. On the back, please go ahead.
Sorry. Jonas Well from the German Broadband Association. In your report, you're mainly talking about regulation. Does this include the negotiation mandates which are currently discussed?
Okay, then when we are talking about the sending party network based model in the report, we are talking about a broader, let's say, model that can have a different implementations. So we are not taking any stand whether it's based on a negotiations or some preset price. So basically, I would say that in the paper we basically study the principle, not the how to implement that principle.
Other reflections or other questions? I have one online. No. But that is for, I think, a different expert. With that, if there are no further questions, we can move on to our second part of the debriefing, and that means we are on to our roaming expert working group, followed by regulatory framework, the PFT working group, and then I'll have some closing remarks on international cooperation and the chair elections. And then we will come back to our second round of Q&As. And I know there are questions that have been sent to us before, but they will be dealt with in our second part of the Q&A session. So I think now we will go on to the roaming working group, and over to Joanna and Elizabeth.
Thank you, Annemarie. Good afternoon to all participants. Unfortunately, Elizabeth could not join today, so I will take this part of the presentation. My presentation concerns the finalization of the BEREC wholesale roaming guidelines. As you might have seen, on the last day of September, we published on the BEREC website the report about the outcome of the public consultation and the final text of the BEREC guidelines, which was adapted after taking into account the comments we received from stakeholders. We would like to thank, first of all stakeholders that participated in this public consultation. The 13 contributions we received were very useful, and as you can see, we have a very good mix of stakeholders, of different stakeholders, including both MNOs and MVNOs. Next slide, please. Coming now to the main comments received during the public consultation, as well as the adjustment made as a result of these comments, this slide includes a short overview of this. Firstly, a number of participants asked to adapt BEREC's guidance about quality of service. We examined these requests, but we concluded that the proposed adjustments would not be in line with the provisions of the regulation, so we rejected these proposals. Secondly, a number of comments were received about access to emergency services. Following this, BEREC included some clarifications in Guideline 16 and Guideline 26. Thirdly, clarifications were also added in Guideline 6 about prioritization of requests on the basis of the comments we received. In addition, some comments about renegotiations were submitted, and we decided to adapt the first guideline accordingly. As regards the guidance about previous generation phase out, we decided, following the requests, that more transparency for indirect access should be included in Guideline 25. In addition, we added some footnotes in some particular guidelines about the cases in which dispute resolution cases apply. Finally, as regards end-to-end services, we received various comments. After examining this, we concluded that there is no need to adapt our text, which is in line with the roaming regulation provisions, apart from some minor adjustments. This is all from my side about the wholesale roaming guidelines. Currently, we are working on the finalization of the retail guidelines, which is scheduled for December. I will be happy to receive any questions you might have during the Q&A session at the end. And I will now pass the floor to Erwin and Antonello from the RF Working Group, who have two very interesting topics to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. In this case, it will be only me, because Antonello unfortunately didn't join us. But I will be presenting to you two topics, so please go to the next slide. Two topics, two opinions, which so one opinion has been adopted by BEREC the last plenary meeting, and concerning the second opinion, we are on the right track to adopt the opinion by means of electronic clearance. So the first topic is, you can see on the slide, the draft BEREC opinion on the draft Commission implementing decision regarding the introduction of an additional reserve number beginning with 116. This is a new helpline for victims of violence against women. And the second topic will be the draft BEREC opinion on the Commission's draft delegated regulation concerning the European emergency number 112. So please go to the next slide. And the next one. What we have done recently is that so after the request of the Commission, we analyzed the Commission's proposal on 116.016, and you can see a kind of history about this initiative. So that started at the beginning of 2021. During the German presidency of the European Union Council. So they launched an initiative to reserve a harmonized European-wide helpline number for victims of violence against women. And what we could also see in that year, that there was a wide support of the member states for such a reservation of such a number. As a result, and as a follow-up of this activity, at the beginning of August, the Commission requested BEREC to provide a draft opinion about this draft decision. And what's happened during the last 2 months, that after thorough analysis, BEREC decided and adopted an opinion on which clearly supports the European Commission's initiative, and so basically this is what we published at the BEREC website. So there is a clear support from the BEREC side on this initiative. So this was the first topic I wanted to share with you, and the second topic is the draft opinion on the Commission's delegated regulation. With measures to ensure effective access to emergency services through emergency communications to the single European emergency number 112. Please go to the next slide. Here you can also see the short history of this activity. Why BEREC is involved in this activity? Because it is clearly requested by the code. So the Commission, on the basis of the requirements set in the code, must come up with a draft delegated or a delegated regulation on the implementation on 112. This must mainly cover 3 areas. The first one is the call allocation information solution. Access. The second one is access for end user with disabilities, and the third area is the routing to the most appropriate PSAP, the public safety answering points, and so this so the Commission approached and requested BEREC to provide our opinion on such a delegated act. This must be done. I mean, the Commission must adopt this delegated act by the end of this year. And it is also important to highlight that this is the first delegated act, and most probably the Commission will provide some further guidance and just draft some further delegated acts in this area. We were requested to provide our opinion again at the beginning of August, and we could and the heads could shortly discuss this draft opinion at the last plenary meeting. However, there was no decision, which is, and as a result of that, we initiated an electronic clearance procedure, which is still ongoing. In the next, and hopefully in the next few days, you will receive some news that whether this opinion is adopted or not. We have high hopes that this will be adopted, but since it is not adopted, I'm really not in a position to share the details of BEREC's opinion. But after adoption, the BEREC opinion will be made public to all of the interested parties. So this is what I wanted to share with you concerning the activity of the Regulatory Framework Working Group. And now I would like to pass the floor to Bert and Maria. Thank you.
Thank you, Erwin. I'm indeed joined by Maria, my co-chair. I'll do the presentation and she will take the complicated questions that may come afterwards. The next slide, please. So we drafted a report on the 5G ecosystem, originally called the 5G value chain. It was a very difficult task, you can imagine, I think, because 5G is still in development and lots is coming ahead. So just like when you take a picture of a moving object, it becomes blurry, and we try to draft it as clear as possible. In 24 pages, we try to cover it all. So it requires some good reading, I think, as we did careful drafting. So in this report, we drafted the value chain based on what you normally find in the canvas. So we describe the stakeholders, the value propositions, the costs, and also new revenue streams. So 5G is, as I said, it's still in development and business cases are still developing. But since 5G is much different from 4G, offering new quality of service, new technicalities, we expect lots of things changing there. This report is based on calls for input. The first one was right after we published the report on the workshop we held last year on innovation and developments of 5G. We asked NRAs about their experience with 5G so far, and later on we sent another questionnaire to the, how you call it, the less traditional stakeholders, cloud providers and other service providers. The next slide, please. So some main takeaways. I think one of the key words is partnerships, working together. We expect new players in the market because 5G is offering new things, so there will be new offerings by specialized players or developments in the current stakeholders we already have. And often we think they have to work together to develop those special services. But it's also, again, quite difficult to predict how that's going to look like. So the new revenue sources have to be developed. So we try to describe that as best as we could. Next slide, please. Lots also depends on how traditional stakeholders are going to invest in their networks, if they have vertical integration or they will give access to others who specialize in slices, for example, system integrators. So there's, I think, a lot of uncertainties at this moment how that will develop. And it requires huge investments as well. Stakeholders also use the opportunity to suggest policies for BEREC to embrace, to study also, so that we can guarantee a level playing field or access to spectrum. And I must immediately say that spectrum is outside the scope of BEREC. But we do have a keen eye on a level playing field, how to create that. And we have also included projects in the work program for next year. For example, cloud switching, which is in the Data Act that we expect to be finalized next year. This study is actually the last 5G specific project that we have so far. A couple of years ago we issued a 5G radar, and we identified lots of topics that could be dealt with by BEREC or needed regulatory attention. And I think we have ticked all those topics that we have identified then. Of course, we will keep on working on 5G, but then not in a 5G specific context, but more in general. So if you have any questions about this report, then please ask Maria after the last session.
Thank you, Bert. And then there were a couple of issues on the agenda last plenary, which are kind of traditional. One, we had a first informal report on the study trip by the mini-board to the East Coast of the United States. We shared with our colleagues on what we learned during that study trip on 5G, on O-RAN, and on, for example, the cooperation with software companies and cloud providers as they see it developing in the States. We have talked to policymakers at the federal, the state and municipal level on digital divide, on the rollout and affordability. And we have also talked to those, to various organizations and agencies on the Universal Service Fund and the enormous amounts that are being paid through the vouchers to make sure that the digital divide within the United States is bridged. And finally, I was able to renew the MOU we have with the FCC. There will be a full report on that visit published only at P4. So then all the details we will share. And we also had at the P3 the elections of the BEREC Chair 2024, so next year's incoming chair, which is Tonko Obiljan, head of HACOM, the NRA from Croatia. And also we had additional members for the mini-board 2023. As you are aware, Kostas will be chair in 2023. I will be in the mini-board as outgoing chair, Tonko will be as incoming chair, and the additional vice chairs are Robert Maurik from Comreg, CTU, and then my pronunciation will be horrible, so I will stick to first names only, as is traditional within BEREC. So Hanna from CTU, the Czech Republic, and Branko, our representative on behalf of the participants without voting rights, who is the head of the regulatory agency in Montenegro. With that, we have a full mini-board for 2023. We have a working program out for public consultation. So let me please echo once more Kostas in asking you to reflect, to give your reflections on that work program. With that, we have, as I said, the draft BEREC work program out there for public consultation, as well as a report on the comparison tools and accreditation, which are out there for your comments. So please take note of the two different deadlines for the work program. That's November 7, in order for the incoming chair to have enough time to take that into account for us to vote on a revised and finalized work program at P4, which is beginning of December. And on the draft report on comparison tools, you have a bit more time. With that and our presentations, are there any questions from the people in the room on any of these subjects that are presented? If so, please raise your hand.
Okay, yeah, I found it. Well, my question will be regarding the work program. Thank you so much. We just gave it a very first and very fast look, and in the introduction we have seen with our pleasure that you will be also taking a look at how the European Electronic Communication Code is being implemented and to what extent the framework, new one, is enabling the achievement of EECC's objectives, which we really welcome. And our question is that, is there any possibility that this kind of focus will go beyond the workshop already in 2023, and maybe it can be a margin for you to start making an assessment report on how it's being implemented, also in terms of the regulatory remedies that are being reviewed in single national member states, because that would be probably very important for us to see and to see it systematically, starting from now. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I will have a look if Kostas is still with us, because he is, of course. Yeah, Kostas, can you answer that question, please?
Well, as you mentioned, the item is there in Work Program 2023, and we see how far we can go. This is an important topic, of course, and we see how far we can go. And it's always it can be a little bit dynamic. So in the end, we can see if we can incorporate some extra deliverables compared to what it is already included in work program.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Other questions in the room? No, then I have two in the email. One is for, I think, our Joanna, co-chair of roaming. That is from Mr. McBride from EENA. Did BEREC raise the issue of European roamers not having access to a voice service while roaming in the US due to compatibility or interoperability issues between certain networks and handsets, and the lack of availability of a circuit switch fallback option on certain mobile networks? This issue, he explains, affects a roaming end user's ability to make a voice call, including a call to emergency services. So, Joanna, did you include European roamers in the US in your work?
Thank you, Annemarie, for the question. Indeed, we understand that there is an issue with 2G, 3G phase out for emergency communications. As regards roaming within EEA, we have tackled this issue in our guidelines, and in particular in guideline 6 about the phase out of 2G, 3G and the prioritization, in order to make sure that this does not happen. However, outside the EEA, and in particular the United States, which is mentioned in the question, the legal obligations of the roaming regulation do not apply. Therefore, BEREC and the NRAs cannot impose such measures that will solve this problem.
Okay, thank you. Then I have one question from Christina Baracci for 5G, the PFT experts. Does the 5G study provide an analysis or offer any recommendations of the impact of new players in the 5G ecosystem on the way barriers to entry are assessed in mobile markets?
Yes, well, thank you very much for the question. As Bert has explained before, for the time being, this is just a fact-finding report, just gathers of the information that we have received from stakeholders. So main conclusion is, for the time being, we think it's quite early to intervene with regulations. So this is not, we have not included any recommendation or any action point with regard to 5G for the time being.
Thank you for that, Maria. I have one question from Rudolf van den Berg Stratix for, I think, Erwin. Will BEREC pay particular attention to whether 112 will remain accessible on all 4G, 5G voice-capable phones? Erwin, or maybe Joanna, did any of you take that into account in the studies?
Should I start?
Please, Erwin. Yeah.
I'm going to start. Okay, just really, as concerning 112 issues, you must be aware that we, as BEREC, have quite a limited responsibility, because the responsibilities of the NRAs all around the member states are very much different, and of course we will really try to do our best to help this process in the field of 112. but BEREC is only one stakeholder in this very, very rich and heterogeneous environment. So we will be following all the developments, and of course we are ready to assist and help any of the EU institutions in this manner. But we are only one player in this field, so we will be doing in the future what it is asked, what kind of requests we are getting from the EU institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanna, anything to add?
I think most has been covered by Erwin. Also in the roaming perspective for accessing 112. We have included some guidance on how to make sure that during the 2G, 3G phase out, operators could be prepared to offer this access to emergency services. Something else that I could also mention, not as a roaming co-chair, but as part of the incoming chairs team, is that for the work program of 2023, we also have considered having a work on the 2G, 3G phase out and the implications this might have on the end users as well. So this is a topic that we could also investigate in this respect. Thank you.
Thank you. So no answer at present, but it can be on this list on 2G, 3G phase out next year. Thank you. Luc, please.
Thank you, Annemarie. I have a question for the monster of Loch Ness. Has the Commission provided any feedback or any view on the review of the access recommendation?
We have received no indication of a timeline yet. And with that, I think we have answered your questions for now. But you are obviously, hopefully, very aware of all the ways that we and all the co-chairs of expert working groups enjoy interacting. They all have, every working group, of course, has its own email address, and we're all always very accessible through the BEREC office and our general emails. Please stay in touch. And I'm looking forward to seeing you at our next meeting, the debrief of the plenary 4, which will be in the second week of December, right here in Brussels and also online.